Alright, g'day teacher geeks. Allow me to explain Trav's Triad, my latest attempt to try to get some really awesome ideas about teaching across in a visual graphic form. Blue's taxonomy has taken the world by storm, or at least it took the world by storm. I feel like it should be falling out of favor. But it's so popular because it's just such a nice, simple graphic. I preferred the solo taxonomy, but I think it just as a visual, it doesn't work as well, and the language is a little confusing. So I'm trying to take the solo taxonomy, rebrand it, also tweak it a little bit in some important ways, and I've come up with today Trav's Triad. Here it is. Let me explain it. And apologies if you've heard me explain this a bunch of times and you get it. Leave me a comment and just say, Trav, we get it, move on. Anyway, building blocks, individual bits of information. The next lesson you're teaching, think to yourself, what are my building blocks? I guarantee there'll be specific things that you need your students to know. And I have to be vague here because this applies to all learning. I'm teaching my kid to read right now, right? My son, that his building blocks are the individual sounds that each letter makes, right? So that's the building blocks, right? Now, it can be even more abstract concepts. So I'm planning an introduction to psychology unit, and the building blocks are different approaches like the psychodynamic approach, humanistic approach, biological, more complicated topics, but still, they're still just individual bits of information that students need to know, right? Then you've got to do something with that. Now, this is where we went wrong in the 1950s, where it was all chalk and talk, and it was all, okay, you need to know all these building blocks. But students were never encouraged or given the time it takes to put things together. And so it was just like getting a whole massive dump truck of bricks and dumping it on kids and going, here, remember this because you need to. Why? It doesn't matter, just remember it. That's where we went wrong. Where we've overcorrected now is we're saying we don't need the building blocks anymore because it's all on the computers. What a waste of nonsense, stupid idea that is anyway. So understanding and application is, okay, taking this knowledge and putting it together in response to some sort of question or problem. We have to make these connections between this information. So for example, my son, right, he needs to know the individual sounds and letters, but it's not enough just to know the alphabet. He then has to be able to string those together to make words, right? And then you get the, cat, cat. The three sounds make the word, and that's how you say cat, right? Same thing, my students, when they're looking at the different approaches in psychology, they have to understand, okay, why? Why would you use a biological approach compared to a cognitive approach, right? Why do we use these things? So it's one thing to say, okay, well, what each approach is. We understand the biology of behavior, but then give a reason. Why do we use that? Okay. Also, they need to know how those things connected to each other, right? I want them to understand how each of those approaches actually relate to one another and how they flowed on from one another, right? So how the behaviorists came out of Freudian psychology, and then how humanistic psychology came out of behavioral psychology, etc., right? So understanding those connections is really important. All right, so we've made the connections here. We've built our wall. We've got a good foundation. Now, critical thinking is tearing that apart, smashing it down, critiquing it, going, wait, hang on, right? Do all these things always connect? Do they connect and relate in every context? Can I rearrange them and make something else? My kid going cat, t. Well, what if we rearrange those? Act, is that a word? Tack, is that a word? Right, that's him critically thinking there, right? If he can go, well, hang on, what if I rearrange these letters? Okay, does that make some other sound? So with the approaches to psychology example I gave, I'm hoping my students will look at it and go, well, hang on, not just one of these approaches is going to be the best one. There's probably going to have to be a combination of approaches. So they go, okay, a psychologist might take an individual approach, but actually there's a limitation to taking just one approach to understand behavior because behavior is so complicated. So actually it's a combination of all three. So we take that, okay, here's why you might use a biological approach, and we smash it down by going, yeah, but it's faulty because you're only going to look at biology, right? That's a critical thinking. Creative thinking I've got here is, okay, you take that, you've learned how to build a brick wall, fantastic. What else can you do with that? And they go, oh, hang on, I can use the same platform, the same link here to go away and build a concrete bridge. Right, or a red brick bridge, right, in this diagram. The idea of creative thinking is taking it and applying it to a new context. So this would perhaps be more relevant in sub-subjects than others. Like, so art, for example, you learn a particular technique and then you go apply that in a different field. PE, you learn a particular skill or strategy, then you go apply that in a different sport. In psychology, they might understand about experimentation and then they go off and do it themselves and conduct their own experiments. Teaching my kid the alphabet, he's learning 2 languages. He's also learning Japanese. So hopefully he can draw the connection between, oh, right, that just shape makes a sound and you put those sounds together, it makes words. I hope he can see the connection with Japanese. It's the exact same thing. Oh, that's just different shapes that make different sounds that make different words, but that's how language works, right? That's creative thinking. Now, the ultimate creative thinking in language would be, okay, create your own language, design your own language. Okay, he's not quite at that level yet, right? But that's, of course, advanced. There we have it. This is Trav's Triad. Let me just give you 3 practical applications of this Triad. Number 1, it can really help struggling learners. Figure out in your lessons, where are you drowning them in too much content and information? Also, figure out, are the building blocks too abstract, too tricky to understand? Where are the gaps in their knowledge, why they might not get it, comes back to, okay, do they know what these individual parts are that I'm trying to get them to understand? The second practical application is it allows us to ask the right questions in our classes, to pose the right problems and well-worded problems to try to get these students to see the connections, right? Third practical application is it's really useful for exam preparation. If you look at any exams, often it's very tricky straight away to see what is required. Now, this depends on the curriculum. If you look at AP exams, for example, a lot of it is just building blocks. You just have to know a whole bunch of these building blocks, so just get a whole bunch of flashcards and memorize, right? Not a lot of application or critical thinking required there, right? I'm looking at the New Zealand psychology curriculum, and the exam looks pretty tricky and abstract. So my first thinking is, okay, what building blocks can I give the kids that they'll be able to use regardless of the question? That helps me feel confident in what I'm teaching. Okay, you need to know these specific things, and then I can go from there. Okay, well, how they might be asked to use them. They're going to be different combinations of how they might have to connect these together, and what's the critical thinking that they'll be able to show in response to these questions. So I can break that down, because all assessments are going to be based on one of these 3 levels, right? Multi-choice is just building blocks, right? Paragraph or essay writing is looking at not only the building blocks, the knowledge, but also being able to make the connections. And some assessments are also looking at that critical thinking. Anyway, I'm hoping I can just show this image and it makes intuitive sense. People just go, I get it, right? That works. I'd love your feedback.